Coming up, for all their sleaze, corruption, general nastiness and incompetence, it was mainly Brexit that broke the Conservative Party. Their interminable arguments made the Tories ungovernable during at least the last decade, pulling its leaders ever further to the right of the political spectrum, chasing populist policies to deflect from their failures in government. And so Brexit was born on the back of an expression of populism. The definition of populism is the tyranny of the majority, where the wishes and needs of the minority are ignored or even attacked, even if the majority is only a 52-48 split. But 8 years later, that wafer-thin Brexit majority has disappeared through a combination of demographic changes that saw the, on average, more elderly Brexit-leaning voters shuffle off this mortal coil, plus the realisation amongst those surviving that whatever problems they had, Brexit turned out not to be the solution. The disappointment of Brexit is showing itself through anti-immigrant riots and gobs on a stick like Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, Isabel Oakshott and Jacob Rees-Mogg, monopolising our TV screens to argue nonsensically that rather than their Brexit not delivering on its promises, that instead we should not believe the evidence of our own eyes and instead believe that Brexit has not been delivered in the first place. But Brexit is all too real, and its effect on the country and on the Conservative Party has been catastrophic. Stay tuned. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment or share a link on your social media, that would all help me enormously. Tony Travers, Professor of Politics at the London School of Economics, recently commented that Brexit got tangled up in the populist tide. The original referendum vote allowed a populist expression, but after 8 years, it's clear that Brexit did not produce the benefits promised by its supporters. Many of them are in fact so disappointed they've managed to convince themselves that Brexit couldn't possibly have even happened, or that we got a very different Brexit to the one that they were voting for, and that the one they did vote for would have been a huge success. Complete delusion, of course. Any flavour of Brexit would have been a step back, economically, socially and culturally. But the disappointment with the Brexit we did get is what has fuelled the recent anti-immigration Farage riots on our streets. It's the broken promises of the Brexitists that represent the deeper causes of the unrest and the continued threat from the far right. The Brexit ultras promised that Brexit would lower immigration, but in reality, it soared. And against the backdrop of Brexit, we had a Tory government that was engaging in anti-immigrant hyperbole, with Braverman and her ilk's toxic talk of invasions, hordes and illegals, at the very same time that the Tory government itself was quietly encouraging an influx of migrants from the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere, because they knew, though they couldn't admit it to their electorate, that immigration of skilled workers is desperately required in order to grow the British economy. So for many years, up until July 2024, we had a government with the twin policies of encouraging soaring immigration while simultaneously whipping up anti-immigration sentiment. They focused our attention on the post-Brexit small boat arrivals from across the Channel, a phenomenon that hadn't existed prior to the fateful Brexit referendum and which has exploded from 2018 onwards, when potential migrants realised that Brexit meant Britain leaving the Dublin Convention, which meant that the UK could no longer send migrants back to their first safe EU country of entry. So Brexit, rather than a solution to the perceived problem of too much immigration, has been the cause of an increase in immigration by irregular routes. We all know that Brexit has hit the British economy by between 4 to 7% annually, depending on which independent expert you're listening to. But the Brexit impact on the Tory party has been equally striking. You may not know or even care, but the Tories are in the throes of a particularly nasty bout of infighting right now as they ramp up their contest to pick their new leader. The The 6 candidates are all doing their level best to out-nasty each other on immigration, the welfare state and the European Union, but none of them have come up with a coherent policy on immigration, taxation, the NHS or economic growth. And on the sidelines, looming over this Tory contest, is the spectre of Nigel Farage, goading the contenders on to being ever more anti-immigrant and anti-EU in their rhetoric, while he threatens to absorb the Tory party within his Ponzi scheme, Reform UK Party Limited, should the new leader not be far right enough for his tastes. Farage and the Faragist Brexitists within the Tory party have between them transformed the party even while they remained in power. And because this happened while they were in power, not only have the Tories disintegrated, but it feels like they've taken the whole country down with them. Looking back over the last few years of Tory government, it's really quite incredible what we've been through. 8 years since the advisory referendum, 5 Tory prime ministers, billions of pounds of COVID corruption and mismanagement, with one of the highest per capita death rates in the world, a prime minister in Boris Johnson cavorting with the son of a KGB agent, putting him in the House of Lords whilst taking Russian money and blocking an unredacted Russia report. The batshit crazy Rwanda scheme, the Truss Kwarteng budgetary catastrophe, the never-ending illegal piss-ups in Downing Street whilst the rest of us followed social distancing rules, the acceptance of massive donations from unrepentant racists, and I just could go on for a whole video. But despite all this, and the fact that the Tory party is rooted in the aristocracy, they still manage to convince working class voters that they're the best ones to look after working class interests. I admit to being a guilty listener to The Rest is Politics, the podcast presented by Tony Blair's wingman Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. This is the former Tory minister, Rory Stewart's, take on his former party. The problem that the Conservatives face is that it's very difficult over 14 years to identify what they've achieved beyond the catastrophe of Brexit. And the polls show that those in favour of Brexit are now outnumbered 2-1 by those who regret it ever happened. On the same theme of Tory non-achievement, in his book Tory Nation, published last year, freelance journalist Samuel Earle said, "The strange dissonance between the Conservative Party's ability to win elections and its destructive record in government stands as one of the defining riddles of British politics." Another ex-senior Tory, Chris Patten, erstwhile governor of Hong Kong and a former Tory party chair, seems to think that the British population now feel that they were sold a piece of crap with Brexit. He reckons that sense of being scammed is one of the reasons people don't want to talk about it. Like Rory Stewart, David Gauke was another pro-EU Tory who was purged from the party by Boris Johnson just before the 2019 oven-ready deal election. David Gauke now has this to say: "The Tory party's strategy has been to give ground to the emerging populism to head off a threat from the right." And he's right. Boris Johnson borrowed the populist rhetoric to achieve his crushing victory in the 2019 election just 5 short years ago, getting the Labour strongholds in the north of England to lend him their vote to get Brexit done. This is what he actually said right after that huge election success. "You may only have lent us your vote. You may intend to return to Labour next time." How right he was. He delivered Brexit, but Brexit failed to deliver any of the benefits that he had promised. Instead, it depressed trade, stunted economic growth, and added Brexit red tape to the movement of goods, capital, people and services between the UK and Europe. And as for Johnson's promises of levelling up, well, we saw money allocated to the Towns Fund being disproportionately allocated to relatively wealthy Tory shires at the expense of deprived urban areas.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone.
No surprise that the dissatisfaction that led to the Brexit vote is still there in Brexit voting parts of the UK. Neither the Tories nor Brexit have done anything to address the problems there. In fact, the Tories themselves have added to the problem by increasing immigration while simultaneously increasing anti-immigrant rhetoric. As a result of this Tory hypocrisy, anti-immigrant feeling on the far right seems to be stronger than ever. This is fuelled by the Tory client media, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express, the Spectator and GB News, who are all telling the Tory leadership candidates that the way to solve the party's problems is to be more right-wing and more anti-immigrant. To be more like Farage and Reform Party UK Limited, the very people who were just asking questions about whether the truth was being withheld from us, about the identity of the mass murderer behind the killings of the 3 little girls in Southport. Tory party membership has fallen from a peak of 2.8 million in 1953 to around 170,000 now, of which half would like to see a merger with Farage's latest Ponzi scheme organisation. What a mess. And the few remaining Tory MPs are still hopelessly split into opposing camps, whilst each of the 6 candidates call for party unity. The final 2 candidates will be presented to the hard right-wing Tory party members, who will choose the most right-wing of the 2 candidates, as they did with Liz Truss, which probably means the winner will be one of the bookmakers' favourites, either toxic and divisive culture warrior Kenny Badenoch, or the generic centrist who suddenly reinvented himself as an anti-immigrant ultra, Robert Honest Bob Jenrick, with his background of sleaze and corruption. Either of them is guaranteed to ensure that the Tories remain unelectable for years to come. At last, a Brexit benefit.
Welcome to the Brexit, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.